out some highly volatile estimates to attempt to answer Christie's question of the last time around, like, so what does 3% mean next year and the year after and the year after, or what does 4% mean? As Jeff pointed out, I should have labeled the tax rate to be a memo item because I merely linked a couple of things on a couple of spreadsheets and made it compute what the tax rate would look like if we had to cover those costs by means of taxes. But it didn't reflect in the revenue. As I was saying to Jeff, this is about a 12 or 13 spreadsheet model all linked together, and the only two that have been received any training on it were Dave and Jason, and that was a while ago. And it's easy to mess up. However, what the point I was trying to make was, so what are the five-year consequences of a 3% increase, a 3.5%? If I only did 2, you guys are bright enough to interpolate in between. What's important to note is there's an $18 million difference between a 3% and a 4% in terms of 5 years of deficits. And that's the difference between the two. What we need to think about, and this has the implications on the point of view, is if we say 3% or 3.5% or 4% in terms of operating costs, there's two things that are going to happen. One, we're going to have to come up with how would we recommend we balance that budget at 3% for FY19, and then what do we want to say in the point of view, if anything, about what it means in FY23. Now, it does not have any of the capital, school capital, fire station capital, construction, other capital costs into it. I could estimate those impacts, they're probably going to add $1, $1.50 to that tax rate 5 years out. But since we don't really have firm amounts and we don't have firm timing, I chose not to mess with that one. So now back to where we were when Christy asked that question that I couldn't answer. What do we think about FY19 and now beyond FY23 in terms of operating cost increases? It's a multiple choice question. Last time when we talked about it, for those of you who weren't here, we kind of ruled out 2.5% because it seemed impossible. But we reached no particular consensus on whether we thought a 3% growth rate or a 3.5% or 4%. Actually, we kind of ruled out 4 because 4 translated into 5% increases in assessments, and in the long run, we didn't think we could cover that. So, Christy, hey, you didn't answer the question 2 weeks ago. You asked for more information, you got your information, now you have to answer the question.
To clarify, what we're talking about here is what % we think we should recommend going forward as a reasonable growth rate?
Right,
okay.
In operating costs.
I don't like any of the answers. I mean, I don't...
You're going to be a very difficult number.
I am. What I'm saying here is that we can't afford a set growth rate. We need to figure out a way to control our growth more. So I'd go towards a lower number in general, which what you're telling me is 3% is kind of the lowest.
Pretty much.
Reason. So I'll go with 3%.
Okay. Well, Tom, you weren't here last time. You have any thoughts on this?
I agree with Christy on that.
Lower the better, okay. Roland?
I agree. I think we need to control costs. You can't, we have Prop 2.5, and we can't keep going to the town saying, hey, we need more, they need more, and more. And it exceeds 2.5 every year. And with the schools, eventually we have to go for a capital override. And I just don't think that that's a prudent way to manage it, but kind of where I kind of stand, but
Okay.
I don't rule anything out at this point.
Dave, my cryptic notes indicate you were at 3 the last time. Have you learned anything that,
No, just that, I think we discussed the teacher's contract has been approved for the next several years, and that sets a relatively higher number. So, like, regardless, coming in at 3%, it may just be dead on arrival that, given the context of that, everything else is going to have to come down some measurable amount to meet the greater teacher's increase. And I don't know how feasible that is, so I think we want to be realistic about what the number is, and it might not be realistic to say 3% or 3.5% or whatever, because it's just not going to happen.
well, I think we have to take a position that that's a reasonable number, and then, obviously we weren't consulted on the teacher's contracts. And, it's a big piece of the budget, but it's not the whole thing.
But the other pieces would correspondingly have to be lower to meet 3% clearly. And the other point I think you had made was making recommendations on balancing the budget as, I don't know if that's really in our wheelhouse to make the recommendations much more so just stating an overall cost increase and let them make the recommendations on what cuts or what this and that they would do on their end. But that's my opinion. We've talked about this in other areas before.
The point I'm trying to make is if we say 3%, then we ought to say, and use X amount of reserves or X amount of untaxed levy capacity. If we have a point of view, it ought to hang together, that's all. I'm not saying it's... Sure. The history of point of views is both the school committee and board of selectmen tend to cherry pick. They take what they like in it, and they don't take it all literally. But I think it's incumbent on us to at least advance something that balances. Sure. Jason. Listen, boys.
So my point on this is that it sickens me that we are already at the point where we're going to be out of reserves. We're going to be taxing at a maximum level. We're going to be counting on unused tax levy. We're going to be counting on new growth. We're going to be hoping that excise is better than it's meant to be, and we still haven't addressed the capital problems. I wish we had found our way to not spend every dime we had prior to getting the big capital expenses that we knew were coming done. To pile on to what Dave said a little bit, I think that the 13% in 3-year increase in the assessment on the school side as a result of the teachers' salaries it's dangerous, because we have, for too long, I feel that we have not given enough emphasis on the physical plant, on the actual capital side. And now we're going to find ourselves with nothing to go to when we finally are in a position to do something about the state of the buildings. So I am very concerned about there being nothing left to do what needs to be done on the school building side. The other thing that I would say is that I think it's very important that we do not allow a request for an operating override to occur before a capital override occurs. I think that we've had our emphasis in the wrong spot for too long, and it's time to fix this before we go for an operating override.
3, 3.5, 4?
3, but let's pay attention to the capital side first.
Mike, my notes aren't clear where you were, 3, 3.5, somewhere in that range.
Well, it would have been the lower number.
Okay.
And 3 would have been the sort of an absolute ceiling. I would have still liked to see an explanation from the school committee how they were going to come up with the additional 13% or whatever it was for teacher salary, how they were planning on funding that increase. What new revenue sources they were looking at, or what expenses they were going to eliminate. You know, I didn't hear any of that. And I just think, you know, spending, negotiating a contract that you have absolutely no, when you know you just have unlimited funds in your checkbook is easy to do. You know, you're not, I don't think they're being accountable as they should be.
Jeff, my notes say you were at 3. You're staying there? Yeah, I don't think so. Bob, my notes say you had 3.5. Sticking with that, or?
I think, given the positions of the selectmen and the school committee, one has to be realistic in what one is trying to get them to come down to. And so 3.5 probably makes more sense than the other. The one thing, since we seem to always be concerned about the negotiations on their teacher salaries, I think it would be nice to ask the school committee if they would be so kind as to lay out exactly where our teachers stand after this, in this contract, compared to the school systems with which they view themselves as competing for teachers. We may, in fact, have not raised them enough, or we may have raised them too much. I don't know, because nobody's ever set that out for us, and I think it would be an interesting exercise for them to do for us.
Okay. We can certainly ask for that. I know they do it as a matter of the negotiations. John?
Well, it's a problem we've struggled with since 2.5 came into law in the early 1980s. How do you maintain the existing level of services on the school and town side within the constraints of 2.5 without periodic overrides? We had 2 successful overrides in 2003 and 2005 to get us back on track after not having a successful override since about 1990. I would go for the 3.5%, but I think we have to, really lay out to both the town side and the school side that although our reserves have been replenishing themselves, they aren't replenishing themselves at the rate that's going out now from year to year once you start tipping over at 2.2, 2.5, 2.6. And show them the numbers and say, if you want to continue to do this, are you prepared to ask for, an override of the next couple of years to maintain the existing level of services? And that's not an unreasonable position to take. It depends what the people want. On teacher salaries, Bob, in terms of the systems that we are compared against, the hyphen systems to our east, Concord, Carlisle, Lincoln, Sudbury, Wayland, Weston, our teachers at the high school level, anyway, teach more kids, teach more classes, and are paid less. So, and that's, that's well known. So I would go with the 3.5%, but I think the strong position that we have to take is to maintain what we have. You're fast coming upon an override. And are you prepared to?
I agree with you, and I think that's basically when we talk about anything beyond FY19, really that's the message we need to send. But I do agree with Jason that, I don't want to try for both the capital and an operating override in the same year, because I remember that. It didn't work out that well.
The problem about not maintaining our facilities is not unique to us. throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the nation, that is it's in the budget, it's the goal, it's the idea, but the first thing that gets scrapped are maintaining facilities, and that's sad.
Yeah, well, it always will. You can kick the can down the road only so long, and then the facilities have to be addressed. All right, well, most of us are saying 3, so for this, what I hope to be the final draft, it'll be 3. We'll all get to vote on it next time. You want to vote against it? That's your prerogative. But if it is 3, then by my highly scientific numbers, we're dealing with about a $2.8 million deficit. No, actually, no. That had the untaxed levy capacity in it. So we're dealing with more like back to my color-coded sheets.
Change the 3-0 in the draft.
Got it. So we're dealing with about $3.5 million deficit. We have available $900,000 in untaxed levy capacity. We have reserves on free cash. In any event, last year we used about 2.6 million in reserves, or let me clarify, one-time money. Both untaxed levy capacity and free cash are one-time money. They're not coming back. So in order to balance the budget even at 3%, it's going to require us to use more one-time money than last year. Part of that has to do with kind of the phasing out of the cost savings agreement we had with Boxborough on regionalization. But that's not all of it. Most of it comes down to costs are going up faster than we plan on revenue going up. So let's go down the untaxed levy capacity road again. Do we want to use it all, none, or, I think as Bob said, half? 900,000. So,
Does this require touching stabilization?
not talking stabilization yet. I'd rather not touch it, but it's still on the table.
If we don't use all the untaxed levy, does that mean we have to use the stabilization?
In theory, we can get pretty close without touching the stabilization.
At what point of usage of the untaxed levy do we then have to use?
Well,
I'll find
Yeah,
your email.
do you have
I'll
your
find your email
code?
from last time. Find it for your email from last time.
what we're coming in here with is untaxed levy capacity of 910,000, free cash of 3 million, stabilization of 2. So in theory, yeah, we could throw a lot of reserves at it from free cash and not touch untaxed levy capacity if you want to use $3 million worth of free cash. Again, it's one-time money.
Steve, did the $3 million free cash figure include our final numbers for the revenue in excess of estimates?
The numbers weren't final, and I don't believe they still are final. We had been carrying a number like 2.1 million in free cash, and I upped it based on guidance I got from Brian and Steve to 3 million. So I upped it by 900,000, over and above the 900,000 replenishment we usually carry, so.
But isn't it
But the
anticipated,
numbers aren't final yet.
but it's anticipated to be more than 900,000?
That's correct, John.
Do you have any idea
So,
estimate
no,
yet?
what I'm saying, John, is we're carrying, I'm now using a 1.8 million replenishment number
Okay.
instead of a 9. So it may go higher. Got any more guidance, Brian?
No, I mean, we'll probably be submitting this Friday, so until we,
So Monday we'll know.
what's that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, Jeff?
The question I have is some of the other pockets of money. Obviously, there's E&D. Would the school be predisposed to use some of its E&D to lower its costs to us? The answer is probably no, because I think they're building that.
They're trying to
that.
build it now.
Well, no, they would, not, they wouldn't give it to us, but they would lower their costs.
Last year, they put in 400,000 for E&D, whereas typically in other years, they put in 250.
So
At the margin, yeah.
change, so it might
You
be
could get some-
changed, but
you
then
could get some more
we
money.
could encourage them to go back to the 250 instead of 400, and that would help us.
No, they threw in 400 of their E&D last year, so we want them to at least do that again. But again, that's not our call.
And the other is, I think you talked about the health reserve,
Yeah,
that
you'd have to-
potentially being.
You'd have to talk to the man on your right.
That is the possibility that we could lower that expense line item
Right.
because they would use some of their reserves next year.
If that happened, Bob, it would be a lower rate as opposed to handing over a check, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are we talking 50,000, hundreds of thousands? I'm trying to get a sense of if it's even possible and what magnitude.
I don't think there's any way that you can give a number because the trustees haven't begun to think about the rates for next year. And so for me to speculate what they may or may not decide is premature. Some years, you hear at town meeting that one of the drivers of the budget was increases in health insurance costs. I doubt that you'll hear that, but exactly what rates you'll hear, I don't know.
Well, with the renegotiations anyway, I think it would probably be a less than normal increase.
One might speculate so.
As far as,
So that's one way of getting down to the 3%, because there wouldn't be
They won't-
an increase in that. In fact, it'd be a decrease from year to year, maybe.
a reasonable person could come to the conclusion we won't have a big health insurance increase this year.
Or even a decrease with the change in.
I don't think any reasonable person would speculate on a decrease in health insurance, not in these times. But, in terms of unspent warrant articles, I'm told by the finance director there's not much money there, if any. So one of our better pools of money in the past is dried up. Yes, Dave?
You know, are there any properties out there that are not being utilized that could be sold to generate funds? Or could be better, the funds could be better used towards these ends?
Well, I think we are going to make sure that the Board of Selectmen get the River Street property reimbursed from the CPC. I think you mentioned last time monetizing this Walker property? Is that how you phrased it? I thought it was a nice turn of a phrase.
It's an idea. 1.8 million would be very helpful.
It would. But again, those are things we can talk about, we can suggest, but it remains to be seen if any of those come to pass. So it really comes down to, do we want to use untaxed levy capacity? Because if the answer is no, then it becomes obvious we take whatever we need out of free cash and leave the stabilization. Yes, Christie?
I think part of Bob's point, and he can correct me last time, was that if we don't only use that, we are going to force people to start looking at the amount of money we're spending if we start having to face actually doing an override. Or, no, I'm sorry, he was talking about taking money out of the stabilization fund.
Well, I guess psychologically, either using the untaxed levy capacity or taking money out of stabilization would tend to send the same message.
Well, but I thought to take money out of stabilization, we had to have a 2/3 vote at town meeting?
2/3 vote, but if you use the untaxed levy capacity, people are going to be looking at a larger than 2.5% increase in their tax bill, so that they're going to notice the spending trend one way or the other. Where they won't see it is if we use all the free cash. That becomes transparent to the taxpayers. All right, so here we go again. Untaxed levy capacity. Jason, what do you think about that? All, half, none?
I am sympathetic to not wanting to shock the citizen by just using untaxed levy capacity and have it all just show up in their tax bill. And so, but I'm also very afraid of losing a budget to a stabilization vote. So I'm going to try and skate the middle here. I'm going to say use half of the untaxed levy capacity, even if that means triggering having to take some money out of the stabilization fund for the 2/3 vote. I think it is very important for us to either help identify or heavily suggest that the spending entities identify what will happen if the stabilization 2/3 vote fails.
Okay, Roland, what do you think?
Kind of the same lines with Jason. I mean, we might even use a quarter of it. So you have it outlying here if need be.
All right.
Then, go ahead and stabilization.
Christine? Last time you were a no. Just to remind you. You're an emphatic no, actually. Okay. Jeff? I think you were a yes last time.
Yeah, I guess Machiavelli told the prince, hit him hard and hit him once and then not have to hit him again for years and years and years. And I think if we kind of take the easy route of using free cash and then, so that they led down this path and then hit them, I think there'd be more resentment. I think we need to make more visible the small amount of pain that's going to increase over time if we don't get things under control, as opposed to all of a sudden they wake up one day and we have no stabilization and now we need 2/3 here and the tax bill goes way out of sight and we have to get all these overrides passed. I really believe that people need to, sort of turning the rheostat of the pain and understanding the predicaments we're in, so they don't come back 2 years from now and say the Finance Committee was hiding things from us for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden we hear these bad things. So I think that's what you were saying, Jason.
All, half, or none?
Ooh, you can take him, that's my line.
All, half, or none?
It was an all last time.
Half of it.
Okay. Bob, you were a half the last time. You still half?
I could stay at half, but there's something golden about a third, a third, a third.
Wait a minute.
We got a quarter over here.
I'll I'm better with percentages than fractions, guys. Okay. Possibly a third. Mike, you're a half.
I would say most favorable economic situation, I would say 0. And worst case is half.
Okay. John, what do you think? You weren't here, so you
No, that's okay.
you get a fresh look.
I'll speak up. I would really try to leave the stabilization fund. I think there's a realistic expectation that the $900,000 in revenues in excess of estimates is going to be increased perhaps to as much as 1.7 to 1.8 million.
It could be, John, it's still preliminary.
Oh.
But yeah, we anticipate, I can tell you, we beat the revenue side.
Yeah, it may go higher. It may go higher.
And we had a turn back of about 300. And so, but again, it's those statutory adjustments. And what I mean by that is we have certain deficits on, we have certain deficits on the book, so DOR looks at those and whether those deficits have increased from last year or decreased. You never know what they're going to do with those, and that's kind of a, we can put together a number, but once you submit to DOR, it's their call, and so you're kind of at their mercy, so that's an unknown component right now. So, but we clearly anticipate beating that $900,000 replenishment by a significant margin.
Okay, so there's potential there if it runs up to 1.7 to 1.8, that free cash would be at 3.7 to 3.8. I hope we could get the selectmen to submit to CPC a proposal to use CPC funds to repurchase River Street.
That'll help us in 20. Okay, that would hit the free
Okay,
cash coming
okay.
in 20, so yeah, so on tax levy capacity.
One half.
Half, all right, good enough. Okay. Dave, you were no.
I am unchanged, and my logic is the free cash and the stabilization fund. I mean, we've used these things to purchase property and land in the past, and they're just sort of extra funds that are floating around out there, while the unused tax levy is clearly a tax increase. So I would vote using these extra funds that are floating around out there in the interim and keep the unused tax levy unused for now.
Tom?
Somewhere between 0 and 100%.
Many of the others have called it a half, but some a quarter and some a third. Christie, you still a no?
If we decide that, to promote the idea of the unused tax levy, how would it become apparent? What I want to understand is how much the public understands, apart from I get my tax bill and suddenly it's a whole lot higher. Does it become part of town meeting?
Yes.
So there's a specific vote around that, or it's just rolled into the overall budget?
No, it's rolled into the budget, but we're going to tell people before they vote on anything that their taxes are going up more than 2.5%.
So it will be an explicit
Yeah.
part of the process?
And it behooves us to explain why it's north of 2.5 as a result of Prop 2.5. So we need to say what it is, why it's at where it's at, and where the funding's coming from.
But to make sure I'm 100% on this, we don't need an override to go above the 2.5 because this is untaxed levy, right?
Right. It's, believe it or not, your tax bills could have been higher.
So if I
So,
can,
Hold on, I have to give
She
an
hasn't
answer.
answered the question. She's very difficult to pin down if you
Yes.
noticed.
I think it's a really hard one. I know the rest of you probably think it's easy.
I can't go back to Christine until you made a
Oh, that's
decision.
In my mind, it's as much about the message and people understanding the predicament we're into potentially going forward if we don't start changing how we're spending.
From a, I guess, political standpoint, sending a message on stabilization is going to be a lot tougher sell to the board of selectmen, school committee, everybody else. Because they don't want to put the two-thirds vote in play for the budgets. So if you want to send a message, probably the best way to send it is by saying something about the untaxed levy capacity. Because I don't think the stabilization fund's going to be touched, because I don't think we have to in this scenario. And when they come back and tell us they can't do 3%,
Yeah.
then we're going to have to stand our ground on somewhere, and it's probably going to be on stabilization.
Okay, I'm going to be difficult and go with 1/3.
Okay. All right, Christine, you ready?
Yeah, I'm similar to where Christie's on this. I'd rather not touch it at all. I worry about the optics of, this tax bill coming up more. And I know that we have a very.
Microphone.
I don't have one.
Oh, borrow one. Or yell.
We know we have overrides coming up in the future. And we know we're going to get pushback on those overrides. And I feel like the longer we can go without a tax increase, the better that builds our discussion when that has to happen. But I don't know if it matters, but I'm looking at the optics of the big picture of them building a story of how often we raise taxes more than the 2.5. So I guess I'm for the lowest possible, which I think was a quarter.
It's just a quarter at the moment.
It was a quarter, so I'm in the quarter camp.
All right, so,
At least I gave a range.
If I may,
you may.
I would like to say, though, I want to restate what I said earlier about if we do think that it's going to go to a stabilization fund vote, if something's going to spill into that stabilization side, I would like the two spending boards to identify in advance what's on the chopping block if it fails. And of course, they get to cherry pick the sweetest, happiest, fanciest thing to put up there. But I think it's important for them to say exactly what's going to get hit or exactly what they're going to do if we do not vote that 2/3 in. Now, it may be politically easy for them to do by cherry picking something nice, but I think I want us to start saying now, if you're going to put something in jeopardy, to your point, John, about we'll let the people decide if this is what they really want, then you got to put it out there as what's at risk. Otherwise there's no skin in the game when it comes to the voting time.
All right, I wasn't kidding, I wasn't that good at fractions and in multiplying fractions, and then dividing by whatever 11 is not something I'm going to do on the spot, but what I've come away with is less than a half. It may be a quarter, it may be a third, but what we will say is less than a half. So that means we're talking roughly 300. It's a third. So if we take 300 out of our tax levy capacity, we still get approximately a $3 million hole on these estimates. So, and we have at least $3 million in free cash. So I would be inclined to say 3% operating cost increase, 1/3 or less than half of the untaxed levy capacity, and the remainder not specify what the free cash amount we're allocating is, but we have enough to cover the gap. Mike?
I'm not sure about the timing, but I think the Walker property, when it is sold, will be worth easily $2 to $3 million.
When it is sold? Is it going to be sold?
Momentum is, yes, there is a market.
No, is the property on the market?
No. we have to do some zoning changes and things of that nature, but it's, it's a hot property.
All right. So, I'm inclined not to touch stabilization, but if anybody wants to make an argument that we should put something in here about doing it, I'm all ears. I just think it's a tough sell at ALG.
Mr. Chair, we bought the Walker property from stabilization funds.
Yes, we did. Sounds like we'll make a profit,
Question on that.
even though neither you or I were in favor of it.
Steve, so if that property then gets sold subsequent years, does that money go back to stabilization?
Yes.
Okay. That's
Automatically?
Well, it has, I believe, well, nothing can automatically go to stabilization because it has to be voted in and out.
It would go back to free cash.
We go back to free cash until we had a town meeting to vote it back into stabilization.
Well, I think the intention is to reimburse the stabilization fund that we sort of borrowed it from.
That's what I thought when it went to town meeting that time, that's what it was.
I think that is the intention. Like I said, it's a two-step process. It has to flow first to free cash and then be voted into stabilization. Then, of course, another piece of property could come up.
Where did the River Street property, where did that money come from at that time? Did that come from stabilization too?
No, free cash, I think.
Free cash, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stabilization funds, anybody want to make an argument? We ought to tap it? Yeah. No, okay. Very good, thank you. That may be all I needed from you guys. Jason? The draft 2.1 is on the table.
Sounds good. Sorry, I only got it out to you guys earlier today. I'd spent a lot of time working on that slide, on that one triple chart. So skipping ahead so obviously an agenda page is boring. There's been no change on the town's financial status solid line. No change on the economic indicators. The next slide. What's that?
I never got it.
Right.
Do we have copies?
Everyone's got a copy. Sorry, I didn't send it.
No, we
I
didn't send
sent
it to
it for
everybody.
printing, and so, but everyone's got a copy in front of them, right?
Does everybody have a copy?
Great.
David,
Janet, you want a copy?
we're sharing the safe paper.
Everybody's got one.
So the tax bill's growing faster than the home values or income. That's actually not accurate. This was the slide from before. It actually is growing. The tax bill is growing faster than the house values, which is true.
I just think because we do have a television audience, they don't have any idea what we're talking about.
If you, okay, give me
I
2
think we
minutes, I'll
should-
put it up on the board.
Well, just read what those bold items are, just so they have an idea what we're talking about.
Okay. The average single-family tax bill between 2010 and 2015 increased by 15.52%. The average single-family house value between 2010 and 2015 increased by only 3.81%. But the average household income between 2010 and 2015 has grown by 19.27%. So,
in the graph, I
Yes.
think it would be helpful if you put dashes or X's for the different ones, and people don't have color, they could do that. But you and I can do that. But the one that you call 15.5, that graph ends at like 18%. So I don't know whether the graph is wrong or the number is wrong.
This is pulled directly from the data. So this is a graph that's created directly from the data, so it may just be skewed in the way that it shows up on the paper. But it's the The 1927, which is the top line, is right under the 120.
Yep.
And there is some daylight between that and the 15. I see that it's not exactly halfway between, I agree with you. But
Okay.
this is what was spit out by Excel when I ran this. So,
Yeah, you'll get a better picture.
okay. I'll try and make it more visually accurate. Yep.
On the bottom of the page, tax bills growing faster than home values or income,
I gotta change the title.
too.
We drop off income.
Okay.
Right.
But I think income should be tax bills growing faster than house values, but not income.
You do that too.
How about just tax bills compared to home values and income?
Okay, tax bills, just strike out, yeah, compared to home values and income.
A word of caution. At the end of this item on the agenda, I intend to appoint a drafting committee to finalize this. So Jason's worked hard on this, and we're going to let some other people have a shot at putting it together. So I'm noticing who's talking and who's not.
You just want to get out of here quickly, don't you?
And I'm not saying whether you're going to be appointed if you're talking or if you're not.
So the purpose actually of this chart, which I definitely spent more time on than the rest of this, because we originally had, if you recall in previous drafts, we had individual charts for these different points. The point of this, thank you Dave, was to index this to 1 and show relative growth speeds in this. So once I make it color-coded, or once I make it dash dot solid, and it actually comes up at 15%, does this do the intended goal of being a first pass on that affordability metric that Jeff asked for a while back?
What does Jeff think?
I'm surprised that the numbers are
Charts should all start.
compatible, that, incomes rose at the same level as the taxes. But what is very surprising is the 4% for home values, because I know
So-
my house wouldn't have been,
So remember, this goes back,
I know it's 8 to 15, 10 to
10.
15, but 8 came before 10, so
and
therefore
we had
things
not
dropped.
recovered, and we had not fully recovered at the end of 10. If you actually look at that, it goes down another couple of percent from, it doesn't stay positive all the time. So 2010 to 2011 and to 2012, it actually drifts a little lower before it recovers. So all the growth occurred in the last year.
It should start at 0.
That's correct.
If you're talking 15%.
So I started at a 1.
Have it going up.
Yeah,
Yep.
it should start at 0.
So it actually did go down. It continued to go down in 2010,
This is
2011,
not the right scale.
before recovering, before stabilizing, before it recovered. This chart's even uglier if you go back to 2005, which I couldn't do because I did not have average household income before 2010. So in the interest of making sure I had like data metrics for every year, this was the only 5-year set that I could get all 3 data metrics for. I would love to have done this through 2016, sitting here in the late Q3 of 2017, but I don't have it. So that's why this is the data range I was able to use. Okay, moving along. I finally got the word total in on the slide for 2010 to 2015 compensation growth. I heard that from everybody, by the way. We are plugging, okay, we're getting, yes,
I'm sorry, the compensation growth page,
yes.
it might be clearer if we said, as a people-intensive business.
Fine with that?
I mean, it's really a labor-intensive business, but I understand the political correct saying people.
You don't think it's a people business?
The people-intensive business.
Salary.
Okay,
Just salary.
yep. Yes, Dave?
On the last two bullets, we've got a very precise measure of the municipal budget, and then we just
What-
said school, it's similar,
Which slide?
same slide,
Okay.
compensation growth.
I
We could be more precise on the school side, if there's a reason why we're not.
I didn't have the time to find all the data and pull it out.
Okay, we can put that in.
So was that, sorry, was that 19.3% increase in the average household income? Was that a final number that you found somewhere?
Yes, that was taking the 5 data points from, and then just doing the math on it.
Because then over 5 years, the annual CAGR of that is going to be 3.6%. So we're saying the average household income grew at 3.6% over the last 5 years, but compensation growing in excess of 4% is not sustainable, and it's not really a clear message saying, oh, household incomes are going up. And you could argue, oh, teachers make up a part of the population or whatever else that may be pulling that up. But their numbers are so close to each other, it's sort of saying teachers' incomes can't grow, or not teachers, but overall compensation growth cannot grow at the same rate as average household income.
If that's,
The point more is, based on Proposition 2.5,
I know, but I think if we're going to say that compensation growth isn't sustainable, and then the counter to that is going to be is, well, everybody's wages are going up that amount, therefore we've got to find a way around Prop 2.5.
okay, so point taken. So if we say recent history of compensation growth growing in excess of 4%,
I guess I question the 19.3% is what I'm questioning.
I'm just pulling,
Yeah,
I'm just pulling the
I
data.
agree. I'm not-
So no, I hear your point that from, so there's 2 things at play here when we look at that number. One is the affordability metric, and on the affordability metric, if that 19.3 number is accurate and you trust the numbers, then I guess maybe the affordability metric may suggest that maybe actually we can swing this. But the point of if compensation growth is running at 4% and you can only tax at 2.5%, then you are, whether or not the tax base can cover that growth, you are going to have an override eventually.
I guess
so the slide should probably be more like not sustainable within Proposition 2.5.
yeah,
as opposed to-
that's much better.
Yeah, that's-
But I don't know many people who've gotten a 4% annual raise over the past 5 years either. So that's why I question that number is,
I can show you where I get the data and run with
that
it,
might
but
be good, just because it seems pretty large.
Is there a difference between median and mean in the town? Is there a
So-
big difference?
I used mean everywhere. I used average everywhere to try and be like for like.
Right. No, I understand that. Would, in fact, I always like to look at extremes. If half the town left that were below the average and people who came in just made a lot more money, would that impact this statistic and not be reflective of people who are here in 10 are making 19% more money in 15? So if the demographics of a town have been shifting, to your point, how could, most of us aren't getting 4% raises for 5 years in a row. So what other reasons could this be? And one of it could be the demographics of the town have changed. That more people who are making a lot more money live in the town 5 years later, and people are leaving who aren't making as much money. The mean might get to that or mitigate that difference, but, the median. But I'm just asking.
I
Mr.
don't
Chairman,
know how to get that data.
demographics can obviously play hob with all these kinds of things, but you're speaking to Jason, who has been arguing for some time that the turnover in town leading to increased students is because older people who presumably have more money and income are moving out and younger people with small children or about to be small children are moving in, so the demographics probably would run counter to the way that you suggest.
Except if people are moving out because they are retired, they're no longer at a high income stream. So if you're 65 and retired and you don't want to pay the Acton taxes anymore, you're not making $100,000+ a year the way that the 35-year-old who has a kid and has finally been able to afford to come into Acton does.
That's certainly true, but the argument always is that people, as soon as they get their kids educated in our wonderful schools, move away. That's not a retirement age. And you go to the senior center and you see people who have stayed here. The obvious answer is it's far too complicated, and you'd have to do too much work in order to try and sort it out.
Well, somebody once said the man with 1 foot in a freezer and 1 foot in a furnace is on average very comfortable. It doesn't tell the whole story.
Should we strip that data from the chart, earlier chart?
Strip what data?
The compensation or the household income?
No, I don't think we should.
It is what it is. I mean,
Yeah, but I mean, I guess what's the message is, do we just want to, it confuses the message. And the message is always fiscal sustainability, I think, is.
well, Dave, you're into the analysis of bonds. This message is good news as far as affordability.
Yeah.
That's a story. The income, we're not sure what's causing it to, and it does kind of confuse the message.
And you could draw a lot of different conclusions from it.
I think what Tom, we don't know what's dependent and what's independent. You could say taxes are going up, so therefore the only people who can move into town are making a lot more money, and therefore bringing the average salary higher. But I asked the question, and Jason did the great work to say affordability. This says that whether it's because out of necessity, people who can't afford town leave and people who can afford town move in, or whether, or not, which is the dependent and independent variable, it says people who are currently here can afford to pay the current taxes, at least on average. But that's why I asked about the median, because there seems to be a segment of town that's being, more squeezed out of affordability.
All right, keep moving.
Next one is the compensation growth slide, the chart. Any comments on that? That's been there since the beginning.
We may want to update. We probably have more recent information than 2015, but that would be consistent with the other one, wouldn't it?
It's staying with all my other data points.
Okay, all right.
Capital projects page. There have been no changes to this since the last draft. Any comments at this time?
Do we have any information on, I guess, the school capital requirements other than the proposed twin school?
It's still at the $4.4 million for immediate life, health, and safety that was labeled on an earlier, I believe I labeled on an earlier slide, or later slide. But I will put it back in, when we get to that slide, I will put it back in red, and I would like JD and Marie to give it one more blessing before it goes to final.
Very good.
Question for you on this one. Is it fire stations we're looking at, or we're looking at one fire station?
We are looking at one now. So,
That's final?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll pull a yes.
there was a thought that there might have been a need for more, but a couple of months ago, I believe, the consultant the Board of Selectmen hired made a report, and it was pretty clear cut that one additional fire station at the Harris Street property that we own, would pretty well balance from a health and safety response time the entire town. So we're looking at one, most likely at that site, in the range of $6-7 million. Right? Roughly.
Okay, I'll take the S off of the new fire station line. Next slide, the first sub-bullet where it says 4.4 million is needed for health, safety, and welfare. I will get buy-in from JD and Marie on that before we go to final vote. The original CIP was 120 million. Are we comfortable with saying more than 100 million, or should I say 120? Is 100 too rounded number, and therefore people aren't going to pay attention to it, and more than is too squishy? Or should I say the original SIP estimate was approximately 120?
That's what I do.
Okay. Okay. Town capital needs line, are we comfortable with the 2.1 million is needed for critical immediate repairs?
That was what was in their consultant report. I haven't heard another number, but
Do I need to follow up with Janet and Brian, or are we good with this number?
He may want to follow up because we just did the roof, are doing the roof at some point. on
But that's
library.
okay, it wasn't part of the immediate capital
I
needs.
thought that was.
It was not.
Okay, fine.
Which brings up the point, I was asked if we should pull that last bullet point. How do people feel about
The
that?
library roof?
Yep.
I like the idea of it, I just thought we try some wording. Any additional investments, question mark. E.g., last year's library roof replacement was not part of the original capital plan. So you're giving an example of, we think this is a list of things, but
Okay.
look what happened last year. We didn't have it in the plan, and boom. I don't know if that's
So
the sentiment you're trying to
if
make,
the
but
third bullet could be something to the effect of, there could be risk to the $16 million number. For example, the library roof replacement last year was not part of this number.
I think you may be getting into too much detail.
I wouldn't have used the word risk. I would just say any other unplanned things. For example, last year we had to pay a roof and it wasn't.
You could say something like identified $16 million above the $1 billion that was required. Yeah, there's different ways you can word it, but yeah, the last bullet point seems a little in your face.
Should I pull it?
I'm not
I
sure.
got one person saying he likes it,
I'm not
I got one
sure.
person saying pull it.
I kind of like it because it says, it makes the town aware that things come up that need to be, that we don't know about right now.
I think it's passive aggressive. I understand what you're trying to say, but the way it's just sort of slid in there, I think you either should say what you're trying to say explicitly or pull it. I don't think it should be in that structure of the bullet points it is either, unless Dorn Whittier pointed it out in their report. There's always unforeseen things that could come up.
That wasn't Dorn Whittier, there's a different consultant.
Yeah.
Could it be a
Those
footnote?
were earlier.
We're not footnoting slides.
Okay, so
Except
total
for the
identified investment was in excess of $16 million. There may be other
Yeah.
Unforeseen.
unforeseen expenditures. Yeah, that's too,
Needs.
Capital needs.
there may be other there may be other as yet unidentified needs. Need more words. Okay, moving to land purchases slide. Okay. The only thing I changed on this slide was I actually got the address right. Any other comments on this slide?
You should, well, Dave can give you the exact words, but you should say that we recommend monetizing the Walker property.
I'm ready, Dave.
Are you thinking of replacing the third bullet here?
Yeah.
I was going to add a third bullet, because that way I get more words on the page.
Yeah,
That is not your goal.
I said that just to get Christie angry.
yeah, you could put some really nice wordy corporate stuff on it, saying, recommend opportunistically liquidating Walker Street property.
Walker Street.
Recommend opportunistically liquidating.
Or monetizing might be, liquidating sounds pretty negative.
Opportunistically monetizing and
Give them a
recapturing
good dose of corporate speak to knock them out, so you can
the expenditure.
be in a weakened position for the rest of the presentation.
Hey, now that, don't get personal. Okay, I'll make that totally not fun to read, and I'll let you guys approve it on the next meeting. Okay, I put that in red, because I got to revisit the wording on that one big time. Okay. That takes us to, skip the next agenda slide, takes us to Finance Committee Reserve Policy.
You know, just real quick, is the committee's recommendation to monetize that property? I mean, Mike, so we should probably have a discussion on that, and if you're not on board with that, we should put whatever the group's opinion is.
I
I know you made
think
the edits.
I think it's a little dangerous to say, because it almost sounds fire sale-ish. I don't want to end up going back to, I mean, we bought that to avoid a child care center right on that property. So
You could make it, you could say evaluating options for Walker property, an opportunistic sale could be possible, or something open-ended and wordy like that, just to plant the seed in their head that, hey, this could be sold, and if it doesn't, fine, great. But if it does, then, and we get a 100% return in 2 years, that would be great.
But I do want to leave the current third bullet of, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the sense of the committee, we would prefer not to have land sit on the books indefinitely.
Correct.
But that's not what you have there, right?
That's what I have here. If you look at the,
Oh, you didn't add Walker Street.
I'm saying I don't want to take this out.
I see.
I'm willing to put something in to explicitly shed light on Walker Street property as another identified need.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just making sure we're not speaking on your behalf.
Well,
Mine,
I
not yours.
I want to avoid this, and I'll wordsmith it as fast as I can here, but I don't want it to appear that we want to fire sale it and, get anything we don't want out there. I mean, I like some of what was brought up at the forum that was done to discuss it, and I made my point very clear to the land use guy. Selby. So he knows exactly what I want, doesn't mean he's going to deliver. So next slide's another useless agenda slide. Finance Committee Reserve Policy.
Too wordy. I think I would.
Hey, I sought outside counsel on this one. I did not write this slide because I hate this. So, too wordy, what do you want to see differently?
I would basically say the first bullet would be at present levels, the lower limit is 1.6 million, the upper limit is 2.7. Don't worry about how we got there. And
2.7.
And I would simply make the second bullet what you have there and not have the sub-bullets. That's all we really need to tell people about reserves is what we think of the limits, and then it should be looked at every year.
Well, don't you think the points for potential sources of replenishment and decide whether to use reserves to manage the operating budget, we just have to what we're doing?
Well, I think that's covered under when we now have monetizing land as a potential source. You know, there's other possibilities for replenishment. I think it's just too wordy.
You suggesting keep the dashes, we get rid of the bullet dots?
Yeah.
I have a question on the methodology, the metrics. I still don't understand why we use different metrics for the upper and the lower threshold. Has it always been so?
Oh, this is brand new. This was the last year was the first year we had this.
We had different drafts of different reserve policy. It really came down to looking at the municipal side and saying, okay, what do we need for reserves in the town budget? And on one hand, people said, well, schools have their own reserves, they have E&D. On the other hand, other people said, yeah, but we're on the hook for what they spend. So it was kind of looking at it both ways and saying, well, we shouldn't be myopic about it and say we only have to look at what's required for the town. We may have to look at other possibilities as well. But it's hard to explain, and that's why.
Well, to that point, you would think the lower threshold should be both municipal and schools. Since we are.
Yeah, but we're only, their E&D is about 2%. So we're on the hook for the excess, if you will.
Their E&D is 4.1% right now until they spend the money for the evaluation funds that we're voting on December 4th. Then they'll be at 2%.
I was thinking ahead.
Yes, they have voted to take it out of E&D in the last meeting. I'll get to that in or Christine will, in the subcommittee update.
Okay.
Next slide, intended reserve policy outcomes. This is in black, which means I didn't have any changes since last time.
Yeah, looks good.
Recommendations for FY19.
All right, here's
Here's where I need a number.
Here's a question. This is a nitpick, but we go into recommendations before we make any conclusions. We thought we'd make our key conclusions and then make our recommendations.
That's easy. I'll reshuffle that slide right now. Okay, so should we go ahead then? Or shall we come back to these slides in a minute? So, okay, so skip the two recommendation slides for now. Let's go to the key conclusion slide. This is all in black, actually. So I haven't made changes to this in a while.
But Jason,
Yep.
Achieving maximum allowable MSBA reimbursement rate makes sense and probably could be just left there. But the next sentence doesn't, I think, make sense. Recommend they adhere to the MSBA partnership. You can't get away from MSBA. You've got to partner with them. What
Yes,
you really mean is
yes, you can. You can go and be in partnership with them and then say, but we want to do something else. And the MSBA can say, that's fine, we're just not going to reimburse you for that.
I understand that, but that's not what this sentence says.
So what would be the point of that?
So what I'm trying to set up here, the reason why I have that last line in this slide is I'm looking to this committee to clearly say that we do not recommend, or I can't say we can't tolerate, that we are suggesting that they not deviate from the MSBA plan and expect to come back and have it be funded. So I was looking for, so if this needs to be different wording, that's fine, but do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
And substitute partnership, plan for partnership. That's really what you want, is to adhere to their plan, not to be their partner.
Well, the second bullet says that.
But I would just take that last sentence out, just leave achieve maximum allowable MSBA reimbursement rate.
Well, can I just, for a second?
Sure.
We can maximize their funding and still add on cost. So I think what he's saying is if we can maximize what they're going to give us and still say, oh, but we want a pool, and they're not going to pay for any of that. So he's trying to differentiate, don't add on a pool.
You're saying you're going to add cost
They could,
over and above what?
over what's, so the MSBA is going to help us upwards of maybe 40% to rebuild Douglas, okay? And we're going to make it into a twin school. And then we could say, okay, but we want like 8 playgrounds at this twin school. And the MSBA is still only going to give us 40% of our...
And we would say we would say no.
Well, this is, his second line is, don't ask for extra things. Go with what you can maximize and nothing more. So that's why he's
That's
talking
why I'm
about
trying
two
to drive it
separate-
home as a separate line.
I think it should be a disincentive for them to add cost to this project.
That's what I'm trying to,
Yes.
accomplish in this line.
That's why he wants the two, like, maximize and don't...
Maximize,
Don't add on.
period, end of discussion.
But you can maximize what they're going to give us and still say, and also, aside from maximizing what they're going to potentially give us, it's two different things because they could give us 30% back or 40% back. We want as much as we can get and also nothing else.
I just would question, and also, stuff.
But we get to the conclusion and recommendation.
If you, when you're saying you're going to have additional costs, it means you're not designing it correctly in the first place.
You could design it correctly and still want more than what they're willing to reimburse us for.
Well, I think the design really should follow precisely the MSBA guidelines.
Right, so I want to make sure that we figure out how to say that because what I already envision from sitting in on all these meetings is we're going to fix the mistakes of the Parker Damon building, which means we're going to have 2 cafeterias and 2 completely separate gyms and 4, it is a backdoor way of trying to undermine the efficiencies of having a twin school. Now, the MSBA is in our corner on this. The MSBA is going to say, this is what will decide that you should build. But what I already envision is someone saying, well, that's okay, we want to do it better. So we're going to add an extra $500,000 here or an extra $1 million there. And I want the sense of the committee that we want to try and get a commitment that they will not do that type of add-on outside of the MSBA partnership.
Those issues, you're right, and the way to do that is get those issues resolved on paper before, a shovel goes in the ground. You got to know exactly what you're building, what they're paying for, what you're getting. So
I think it actually has to happen before then. It has to be part of how the school building and how the school committee approaches the building. So I want us on record saying, guys, don't gold plate anything.
So doesn't it really come down to achieving the maximum allowable
It does.
MSB reimbursement percentage?
It does.
Percentage of total cost?
But I'm not trying to be passively aggressive, I'm trying to be explicitly aggressive.
I think Mike said it pretty clearly, that what we're trying to say there is that we want the design to maximize to meet MSBA guidelines.
Okay?
All right, well, my drafting committee is going to take another look at this one. All right, let's keep going.
Oh, I changed that. I got to put a note down on this. Change this.
Is that in bold and in red?
Yeah. Okay, next slide is another key conclusion. Looks like I split out near term and longer term. So these are the near term key conclusions. Any issues with the near term slide? Any issues with the longer term slide?
We changed capital needed for facilities, capital needs for facilities. Maybe not.
Where?
Either long-term, first one.
Given the magnitude of capital.
Needed, says like capital needs,
Oh,
maybe, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know
got
if that's, if you need that or need to work better, I don't know.
Given the magnitude of capital.
Because if it needs, then you're not that far in above.
Yeah, okay.
3 years.
Okay, last key conclusion slide. What? I can pull it. Currently, there is an acting superintendent yet. We have an interim, yes.
Yeah.
Interim.
Actually, the whole page could go. It doesn't, by the time this thing gets out, everybody knows that all these personnel changes are in the wind, so I would just drop the page.
Very well. So, drop that slide. Then we will go back to the two recommendations pages. I'm looking at the one that says funding of OPEB should continue.
Hey, Brian, have we heard anything, do we have a date when we may hear anything on towns? Okay. Schools OPEB evaluation came in, and it was, it's hard to characterize OPEB evaluation, but it was probably more favorable than I expected. Again, I'll assume that the towns will be similar, and yeah, funding at the current levels is more than adequate. We don't have to consider any kind of an increase in what we're doing.
Is OPEB widely understood? We need a parenthetical description of what it is.
Well, you're killing me, Tom. I mean, for the last 4 years, I've made a presentation at town meeting every year about OPEB. However, I think you're right. We probably do need to spell it out. The near-term capital, again, a little wordy. As far as reserves go, I would say that we should probably be a little more subtle and just say we should balance the budget out of free cash and not say a specific number at this point, because we haven't really seen any budgets yet.
Also, are we standing behind our preference that reserves be used for one-time capital projects and not for operating expenses?
Well, since we don't know how much capital is going to be in the operating budgets, it's a little premature to say. Yeah, as a statement, yes. But
You're talking about intended reserve policy outcomes?
now we're still talking about reserve recommendation. I was addressing the page. It starts with OPEB, then goes to near-term capital, then goes to reserves.
I think you can combine the selectmen are requested and the school district is requested, and put those as selectmen and school district
Okay.
are requested.
Well, that whole second bullet is almost a repeat. If you go 2 pages to key conclusion,
Yeah.
you say it again, so is it a conclusion or is it a recommendation?
I think on the, well, we can probably go with that second recommendations for FY19, and it starts off operating budgets. We can say 3%, we can say 1/3 of the unused tax levy, and throw in the balance, the budget should be balanced from free cash, not stabilization.
Keep the bullet, we are more in jeopardy of being below the reserve policy floor than above the ceiling.
Yeah.
I like that.
Actually, free cash / E&D.
Okay, back to the first of the recommendation slide to Tom's point about having something under both conclusion and recommendation. Do I need to clean that up?
Yeah, you do. Or somebody does.
Okay, I think I've got it. I think I've got it for this. I'll make one last note and then we can move on.
All right, I'm looking for volunteers to work on drafting the final draft of the point of view. And what I'm going to say is it needs to be done within the next week. So if you're tied up for the week, don't volunteer. And by that I mean I'd like to get it out to the committee well ahead of the meeting, so that people have a chance to review it and be prepared to vote for or against at our next meeting. So, yeah, roughly a week from now or 10 days or whatever, but I want people to have time to review it. I'm looking for maybe 2 to 3 people.
Obviously, I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'll help you.
Roland?
I would have out of town Tuesdays, but
Good, Tom. Christine?
Are you talking look and feel? Like, what is
The word, the one that goes into the,
I'm talking that, and I want somebody new, simply because I want somebody to be looking at this saying, well, do I get this? Is it going to come across to other people in an understandable fashion? So,
No, I'm happy to.
okay, so it's the 3 of you. Since I don't particularly want to skirt the open meeting law on this, you should schedule yourselves into a public room and take minutes. The minutes could be, we met,
And we have
we
to,
came up with a draft.
and
Here it is.
so we have to post 2 days in
We have
advance?
to post 2 days in advance.
Okay. We need to talk schedules at the end of the meeting, folks, and make it happen.
Do you want to go, Kristen?
I did, but I have a big project. I have one big project here, and it's next week.
You'll still get to vote. All right, good. Excellent, we accomplished a lot. Committee reports? Yes, Roland.
Well, CPC meets on Thursday, but the town lawsuit that went to the SJC was last week. And I guess we're supposed to be having some kind of determination in the future.
In the future, or?
The separation of church and state, Citizens United versus the town of Acton went to the SJC last week.
I listened to
That argument, I thought, both sides, held up their ends, and there were really good questions from the justices. They had really
Do you know
read their stuff.
Do you know when the decision's supposed to be coming down?
I thought, as I watched this, it's normally about 3 months from, so if they were in their first week in September, so say first week in December. I mean, they probably decided the case after the oral argument, but then it's got to get written up and circulated and the like.
Thanks, John.
Christine, school committee, or Jason, or? Jason's got a microphone.
So thank you for sending out the enrollment numbers. They're positive, they're not negative, which may be a negative. So that's the first part. The next bit is the latest and greatest iteration ballpark number for the school building project. They went back and asked for updated numbers with the preschool, with the pre-K classrooms added to it. I got 3 numbers for you. One is $98 million if it was built today. It's $123 million if it's a 6-year escalation cost from today. And the third number is a range. It's 110 to 115 if it's a 4-year escalation cost. So when we get this approved matters. When we can break ground, it matters. The other thing that was decided in the last school committee meeting was they did officially vote to take the feasibility funds from E&D. I thought they had said the full 1.3 in the motion of the article, but they're saying that was not actually part of the article. That was just part of what they described in advance. But they believe they're going to stick to that 1.3 number, but that's not officially voted, although I swore it was part of it. But I'm told to go back and listen to the tape that no, the number was not actually in the motion as officially read. But the fact that it's coming out of E&D and has been approved by the school committee to come out of E&D was a big deal. They also approved at the previous meeting, I think I mentioned this, to go with the twin school that does not have an ECC. Does not have an early childhood center. They voted not to go with an ECC.
I heard just the opposite, that there would be the twin school with an early childhood center.
No. It's a twin school with classrooms for pre-K. That is not the plan. The ECC is pulling kindergarten from every single school in town and bringing them into one half of that building. That is not what they're doing. They're adding some preschool classrooms.
That's what I understood, yeah, okay.
That is not the ECC. The ECC is something completely different.
That's good, okay. And then Acton kids would use these additional classrooms, and then the Boxborough kids would have their preschool and...
Same as always, they can lottery in if they wish to.
Okay.
Did I miss anything? I didn't make it around to the end of that. Do you want to chime in on that one? What was the final number they settled upon? 10,000. They voted on giving, awarding to Marie Altieri a $10,000 adjustment in her salary for the time that she was the acting superintendent.
Wow. Must be nice.
There's a microphone right there.
Okay, so Bill McAlduff, the interim superintendent, said that it is common when you have somebody fill in not just on a short-term basis, but as the acting, moving the ball forward, working as the superintendent, it's actually common to, at that point, vote in a salary adjustment up to commensurate with the role. And we didn't do that, so they did the math on how much she should have been paid over what she was paid. It worked out to about $6,100, but they thought that wasn't enough. So it was proposed that they give her 20, and that was voted down, and so they settled in at 10.
Jeez, I was never the benefit of that kind of rounding. Okay. Board of Selectmen.
No, well, this is Kelly's Corner.
Oh. Whatever. Talk about whatever committees you want.
Okay, sure, okay. This is, Kelly's Corner is coming up again. There is a steering committee. I'm a member of that off of our board. There is a steering committee meeting it's an open meeting here on September 21 at 7:30 to meet with a Stop and Shop's preferred developer, a fellow Adam Winstanley of Concord, to begin to explore his suggested options. Just by way of background, Stop and Shop is starting to divest themselves of certain properties. They own the property that Kmart is on, and they're apparently gonna sell it, and this is their preferred developer to develop the property. So he's coming forth with his set of plans and the like. I can circulate a memo that Andy Brockway, the chair of the steering committee, sent to chairmen of the various boards in town. That'll give you a good overview of what's in the works.
What percentage residential are they proposing?
I'll see you on the 21st. I share your concern about that.
I don't think they're at that stage yet, but
But that would be one of we want apparently want his vision of that. But I share your view and your concern about residential development in that parcel.
Board of Selectmen?
Well, we had the meeting last night. There was supposed to be a Kelly's discussion. That was put off for 2 weeks, Janet. There's, part of the program is traffic on 111 and Mass Ave, and to, make it wider with turn areas. And one of it would involve a taking that would take a portion of the frontage away from the Hosmer house. So the the Acton Historical Society, I think, is meeting with UP, with the Board of Selectmen. The issue with the Historic Society, the potential taking of frontage from their property, I mean, that's what took it off.
Well, I gather that some of the people in the Historical Society are a little bit confused about, well, they claim to be, but I think they just don't want any change. If you look at the Hosmer house, there's really not very much frontage. There's a stone wall that really is along the edge of the front of the property, and it rises. And so the idea was to take some frontage and to be able to widen the road, to have the bike paths and sidewalk and all that. And there's been some discussion about compromising in front of that properties to allow more frontage in front of the house. And then there was talk about having a sidewalk that actually came closer to the house so people would actually appreciate it. There's concern about there are 2 very large trees that at least one of which would probably have to come down in any event. There are some people who are landscape architects who say the trees aren't in very good shape, and maybe, you should think about planting something new that actually would be better maintained. So that's an issue. I think that the infrastructure plan is going to have to get modified to accommodate the Hosmer House concerns. And I think some of that discussion is what is going to be going on in the next couple of weeks before everybody comes back to the board. Because that was the thing that kind of, the last time there was a presentation to us, the Hosmer House issue came up, and the Historical Society people said they didn't know what was going on, even though I think they had been included in discussions. And so we just wanted to make sure that whatever their concerns were adequately addressed before we continued the discussion of the project. So that's what's happening. And then there's that other thing. I've heard about the Kmart site potential development. So.
Thank you. Any other committee reports? Yeah, Mike.
Mary is doing well on schedule. But from the EDC point of view, the Insulet groundbreaking officially happens on the morning of the 21st.
Okay. Excellent.
Heard rumor that the Council on Aging building opened last Monday? Is that
Senior center, you mean?
the senior center?
I heard the same rumor.
Anyone got verification on it?
It's open?
Sweet.
Nice.
I think they've moved as of the 5th. I haven't been over there to look at it, but they've moved as of.
Oh, you're not old enough to go there.
Excuse me?
You're not old enough to go there, right?
Oh, yeah, I am. But it's not of burning interest to me, so, yeah, I'll admit it, yeah.
All right. As far as upcoming meetings going, well, obviously, we'll be looking at the final POV. We will be having a presentation or discussing Minuteman capital, meaning now that they're building the building, we have to figure out how to pay our share, which could take the form of either a capital exclusion or one entity or the other taking it into the operating budget. So we'll, or both. We'll have a presentation on that, and we'll be discussing it. And that'll happen at our next meeting. And is it going to be you, Brian, or Steve Ledoux or Steve Barrett that's going to tell us about? They want to do a tutorial on collective bargaining agreements and negotiating, which I think would be helpful. So it's going to be you? Steve B., okay. October 10th, the interim superintendent, the new finance director for the schools, and various school committee members will be here to tell us what they plan to do in terms of a building project and what's going to happen from their point of view on December 4th special town meeting, and give an update on enrollment. Anything else? Yeah, that's all we got going for October 10th. I would then expect that you would ask whatever questions, concerns you have at that time, because I think time will grow short and we'll need to take a position on the proposal probably 2 weeks after that. Any other business that needs to come before the committee? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. That all.